5 permission problems that you are probably making inside of Jira that I'm going to try to help you avoid. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel. Drop a like if you get value out of this video. And if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, let me know in the comment section below. Also, please don't forget to check out the description, as that contains links to all the stuff that I am involved in, all the different ways that you can support the channel. Most importantly, it gives you the information that you need for my paid trainings. So if you want professional paid trainings, 12-hour courses with me, all that information is in the link below. Let's jump into today's video. So let's talk about 5 different permission mistakes that you're probably making inside of Jira. I've seen these countless times, and I'm going to try to help you avoid these problems because it just happens so much, and they're so simple. They're so simple to navigate through. But if you don't know what you don't know, it can be kind of hard. So let's start off with number 1. Problem number 1 that you're most likely doing is you are hard coding. You are embedding groups or users into your permission schemes. While this is efficient, it doesn't scale, and it can cause different kinds of problems and different kinds of headaches down the road. And so what do I mean by this? So if you have a permission scheme and for your browse permissions, you go and add Timmy and Jimmy directly as users. Well, now Timmy and Jimmy have access to any project that uses that same permission scheme. While this might be a good idea, what happens when we start adding a few other users? So what happens when we add 10, 20, 30, 50, 100, 200 users? Well, if you go down this route of hard coding each user, this becomes a maintenance nightmare. So the next logical solution is like, well, let's put those 100 people into a group and we'll hard code that group into that project. Well, now the problem is now you're giving 100 people access to any project that permission scheme is in use. While this might be a good idea, it just doesn't scale well, because what happens when you don't want 100 people to access that project? What happens when we want a special project or 2 or 3 or 4? See, it becomes a little bit more hard to maintain. Also, it doesn't jive with Jira's UI for how to actually add users. And so there's a specific way that you're supposed to add users, and roles play a critical part. And if you're hard coding all the users or groups into the permission scheme, you're really bypassing the way Jira's intended to use it, and you're probably not using it correctly. So I recommend that you do what's called a role-based access. Some companies know it as rollback or RBAC, but it's a little bit harder to do in Jira. And so just make sure that in your permission scheme, you aren't explicitly adding users. Add a role, a project role, and then within each project, either at a user level or a group level, add that individual to the right role, which will then give them the right permission in Jira. Mistake number 2. When you look at a permission scheme inside of a company managed Jira project, you'll notice that there's a long laundry list of all the different configurations and permissions that you can set. Now, the mistake here is that most folks think that they have to modify every single one. But that's not the case. You really only have to worry about the browse project's permission. And the reason that is because that browse project's permission acts as a gatekeeper. If your users don't meet the qualifications for that permission, they can't get in. And if they can't get in, they're automatically locked out. But once they're inside, once they come inside, unless you have special requirements that you want some users to be able to create, others to edit, others to transition, whatever, unless you have those explicit requirements, for the most part, as long as you can get into a project, you want your team to be able to do everything in the project. So all you need to do is make sure that your permission scheme at the browse project's permission is set up correctly, and everything else can be left open, because unless they can get into the project, they're not going to be able to do anything else. So, but once they're in the project, you can give everybody the benefit of the doubt and let them do everything you want. And so now at this point, you just start locking up certain things, like who can delete stuff and things like that. That's a much more manageable setting to set than going through like all 25 different permissions and like adding every role to it. It just becomes very tedious when you don't have to do all that. Common problem number 3. When you are adding a user to Jira, they automatically get put into a Jira users group. This happens automatically whenever you give them a license. But sometimes you don't put people in the Jira users group. and you think it's a really good idea, and you put in some sort of like external group or some other Jira group in general. Now, when you do this, while this is a great organizational idea, if that new group that user is in is not in the global permissions for browsing users, then anybody in that group, while they will have access to a project, they won't be able to assign anybody any issues because they're not going to be able to see user lists in Jira. So you want to make sure that if you do kick folks out of the default Jira users group and you put them in a different group, you want to make sure that that group is also now in that global permission. Otherwise, you're going to have a handful of users that just simply cannot assign issues to anybody, and you're going to have a flood of support tickets coming in your way. Problem number 4, and this is something that I see almost every single day. Whenever you create a filter, that filter is private. And that means that only the author, the creator of that filter, is able to see that filter. But we don't live in a siloed world. We don't live in a world where it's just a very singular person doing things inside of Jira. Jira is a team project. It's a team effort. And so most of the time we want to share that information. We want to share those filters with everybody. But by default, those filters are set to private. So after you create a filter, you have to go back in, go to the details, and then make sure you open up the permission to who can view that filter. Otherwise, this has detrimental impacts on who can view the filter, who can view the dashboards that reference that filter, and who can view any advanced roadmaps that view that filter, and finally, who can view any boards that reference that filter. So if you're doing any changes to your filters, always make sure you're going back into your filter and make sure that under details and under permissions, that view permission is appropriately set so that you and your team can all benefit from having that filter. And then finally, problem number 5 that I see very, very common as well is having just way too many cooks in the kitchen. I jump into all kinds of Jiras, and I typically see all kinds of administrators, site administrators, org administrators, Jira administrators, project administrators. There's just so many administrators that most folks just don't know what does what, and so they just give everybody admin privileges. And when you give too many admin privileges, whether it's at the project level, the site level, or just the Jira level, this is a recipe for some disaster because folks don't communicate. They don't talk to each other, and because they can do certain functionalities, because they have the power to do certain things in Jira, they tend to go and do things without communicating. And this could have some serious consequences downstream because somebody might have a clever idea that is just completely sidelining or blindsiding somebody else, and now you have a very, very big problem on your hands. So make sure that you review. Make sure that you review and make sure that you're auditing who your users are and keep your admin list as low as possible. Just because somebody needs admin rights doesn't mean that they should have admin rights. In Jira, admins are very, very powerful, and there's a lot of stuff you can do. And if you're not careful, if you're not trained, if you don't know what you're doing, you can get into some serious trouble very, very quickly. So make sure that whoever does have admins, go like Uncle Ben here, with great power comes great responsibility. Make sure they all know what their power carries and the kind of detrimental things that they can do to their specific Jira. So that's it for this video. Hope you enjoyed it. Those are some of the 5 common problems that I typically see from a permissions perspective. And I hope that this video helped you out. And if it did, make sure you smash that like button. And if you made it this far and you're not subscribed, make sure you smash the subscribe button. Both of those activities are completely free to you, and they help the channel grow tremendously. So make sure you smash those 2 buttons. And then if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, or maybe, hopefully, fingers crossed, if you want to share your horror stories, let me know in the comment section below. I'd love to read them. That's it for this video. Make sure you check out the link in the description below for all the links on how you can support the channel, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.
It's only worth it if you work for it. It's only worth it if you work for it. I won't stop till they hear me now.